The man on the porch didn't ask me who I was. He just looked at me for a long second, through the screen door, rain coming off the gutter behind me, and then he said, "How long has your father got?" I hadn't told him I had a father. I hadn't told him anything at all. I'd driven 11 hours to knock on a stranger's door, and he already knew why I'd come. He unlatched the screen, stepped back to let me in, and on his way down the hall, without turning around, he said, "So, what's she calling herself now?" That was a Tuesday, in March. And to explain how a 51-year-old contractor from Hadley Falls, Ohio, ended up standing in that hallway with rainwater in his boots, I have to take you back about 3.5 years, to the October my mother died. My name is Ray Hollis. I build things. Kitchens, additions, the occasional whole house if the bank's feeling generous. 30 years of it. My hands look like it. You'd know if you shook one. My father is Walter Hollis, 78 years old. He ran a machine shop out on Route 9 for 31 years. Hollis Machine and Tool. Gold letters on the window. Letters he painted himself because the sign company wanted $300 and my father would rather die. He sold it in '09 for more than any of us expected. Put most of it away. Never bought a new car in his life. And before you ask, yes, there was money, somewhere north of $1 million, plus the house on Fenton Street, plus 40 acres and a cabin up at Kettle Lake, where my father and I built the dock in 1989, when I was 14 and he let me pour the footings myself. I scratched my initials in the wet concrete with a 16-penny nail. They're still there. You can still read them. I'm telling you about the money up front, because if I skip past it, you'll think I'm hiding something. But understand me. If she'd taken every dollar and left me the man, I'd have signed the papers myself. That's not a noble thing to say. It's just the truth of what I lost. My mother was Eileen. 49 years, those two. 49. She wrote her grocery lists on the backs of envelopes. Every single one. There was a drawer in that kitchen. A drawer I built with my own hands. Stuffed full of torn open electric bills with milk, sharp cheddar, light bulbs on the back in her handwriting. She died on a Tuesday in October. My father sat next to that bed for 9 days and never slept more than an hour at a stretch. Here's what I want you to understand about Walter Hollis. He was not a warm man. He was a present man. There's a difference, and if your father was the same kind, you already know it. He never once told me he loved me. He also never once missed anything. Not a game. Not a graduation. Not the night my daughter Nora was born, when he drove 90 minutes through an ice storm just to sit in a waiting room and not say a word to anybody. And after Mom, he just stopped. I'd go over Sundays. That was our thing. 30 years of it. Coffee, game on low, neither of us talking much. Only now he'd forget to make the coffee. He'd sit in her chair, not his. And on the windowsill over the sink, right where she left them, were her reading glasses. Folded. Still there. I checked every Sunday without meaning to. My wife, Dana, she's a hospice nurse, 26 years. She's seen more grief than most people see weather. She told me, "Ray, he's not sad. He's untethered. He doesn't know what he's for anymore." She was right, and, I didn't fix it. That's the part I'd take back. I brought casseroles. I cleaned his gutters. I sat on that couch for 30 Sundays and let the silence be the silence, because that's what we'd always done. And I told myself it was enough. It wasn't enough. And somebody else noticed it wasn't. The Thursday grief group met in the fellowship hall at Bethel Methodist. Folding chairs, bad coffee, a nice lady named Pat who ran it with a box of tissues in her lap. Dana's the one who talked him into going. I want that on the record. My wife, out of pure kindness, drove my father to the room where he met her. Her name was Delia Vance. 63 years old. And I'll tell you the truth because it matters. The first time I met her, I liked her. She came to a Sunday. Brought a pie, not a store pie, a real one, lattice top, still warm. And she didn't do the thing people do where they talk too much to fill a room. She was quiet. She listened. She asked about my work. And here's the thing. She remembered the answers. 3 weeks later, she asked how the Feltner job turned out. By name. Nobody remembers the Feltner job. She'd lost her husband, she said. Owen, down in Florida, a long illness. She said the word illness, the way you say it when you've actually been in the room for one. And when my father made a joke, my father, who hadn't made a joke since the funeral, she laughed at it, head back, real. I watched him watch her laugh, and I thought, thank God. I actually thought, thank God, look, sit with that a second, because I'd had 3 years too. Everybody wants the villain to walk in with the music playing. She didn't. She walked in with a pie, and she was good to him, and the man who was untethered got tethered, and his son stood in the doorway of the kitchen he'd built with his own 2 hands and felt nothing but relief. That's how it works. That's how it actually works. 10 months after that first Sunday, they got married. I found out 6 days later. 6 days. I was at Kepler's hardware store on Main. I've had an account there since I was 22. And Sandy Kepler was ringing up a box of deck screws, and she said, "Oh, Ray, congratulations." Your dad and Delia. Sherry saw them at the courthouse. They looked so happy. And I just stood there, holding my deck screws, making my face do a thing. I said, yeah. It was real nice. Then I walked out to my truck and sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes without moving. My father got married, and I heard about it from Sandy Kepler. I called him that night. And he was strange about it, not guilty, confused. He said, "Well, we didn't want to fuss." And when I said, "Dad, I'm not a fuss, I'm your son," there was this pause on the line, and then quiet. Almost like he was asking me a question. "Delia said you'd be upset. She said I'd be upset." And she was right, wasn't she? She'd been right before it happened. She told him exactly what I would do, and then I went and did it. And every single time after that, when I got angry about something she'd pulled, all it ever did was prove her. That was the first brick. I didn't even see it get laid. If this is pulling you in, do me a favor. Subscribe, hit like, and tap that bell so the next one finds you. Okay, where was I? Right, the letter. 6 weeks after that courthouse wedding, an envelope showed up at my house. Law office in Columbus. Not my father's lawyer. Dad's lawyer was Merle Otis, who'd handled his will and his business papers and his own mother's estate for 40 years, out of an office above the bank on Main Street. This was somebody else. Somebody I'd never heard of in my life. 1 page. It informed me that Walter A. Hollis had executed a revocation of durable power of attorney for healthcare, and that I was, effective immediately, no longer his agent for medical decisions. You've got to understand. We signed that thing together. 2019. Mom was still alive. We sat at that kitchen table with a notary, and Mom made coffee, and Dad said, "If I get stupid, you pull the plug. Don't be sentimental." And she smacked his arm with a dish towel, and the whole room laughed. I read that page maybe 6 times, and then I looked at the date on it. They married on a Friday. That revocation was notarized on the 2nd Tuesday after. 11 days. She'd had him 11 days. 11 days, and my name was already off the one piece of paper that would have let me stand between him and anything at all, and that's when it hit me. Not all at once. Just a cold little crack of it. You don't move that fast by accident. You don't know which paper to go for first, and which lawyer to call, and how to get a 78-year-old man into an office in Columbus without his son ever hearing about it, unless you've done it before. But I didn't chase that thought. Not yet. I was too busy being angry at my father, which was exactly what she needed me to be. Because here's what a man does with a letter like that. He gets in his truck. I drove over to Vinton Street with that page folded in my shirt pocket, and I had the whole thing worked out on the way. I was going to be calm, reasonable, lay it on the table, and let it speak for itself. Delia opened the door, not Dad. Delia. In my mother's house, with a dish towel over her shoulder. And she smiled and said, "Ray, come in, it's freezing," and stepped back, and I had to walk past her to get into the house I grew up in. Small thing. Just a doorway. You feel it, though. Dad was at the kitchen table doing the crossword in pen, like always. I put the letter down on the wood in front of him and said, "Dad, what is this?" He picked it up, held it out at arm's length, the way he does, read maybe 2 lines, and he said, "Oh, that's from the fall. The fall." Turns out, and I had never heard one word about this, my father had gotten dizzy out in the garage back in September, went down on one knee. Delia drove him to the ER over in Millbrook, and they sat there 5 hours, and he came home with a note about his blood pressure medication. 5 hours in an emergency room. Nobody called me. I said it out loud. Nobody called me. And my father looked up and said, "We called you, Raymond. You didn't answer." Now, I had my phone in my hand, so I did what you'd do. I stood in my mother's kitchen, scrolling backwards through September like a fool, hunting for a call that was not there. No missed call, no voicemail, nothing. I said, "Dad, there's no call. Look, there's nothing." And that's when Delia said, from over by the sink, not even turning around. Soft as anything, I called the house line. "Honey, I don't have a house line. Nobody's had a house line since 2011, and I want you to hear how small that is. It's nothing. It's a mix-up. Any decent man lets it go. Oh, she meant the shop number. Oh, she's 63. She gets confused." Except she didn't sound confused. She sounded sorry for me. I said, "Delia, I don't have a house line." And she turned around with her hands in a dish towel and said, "Oh, I'm sure I did it wrong then. I'm so sorry, Ray. That's my fault." She apologized. She took the blame, instantly, completely. And my father sat there and watched his son argue with the woman who'd just apologized to him. So I got loud. Not screaming. I raised my voice maybe one notch. I said, "Dad, you took me off your medical papers. 11 days after you got married." 11 days. And Delia, this is the part I still see. Delia didn't fight me, didn't defend herself. She just walked over and put her hand on my father's shoulder. And my father flinched. 78 years old, in the chair he'd sat in for 40 years, and when his son raised his voice, Walter Hollis flinched, and she said, "Walter, it's all right." She said it like she was standing between him and something, between him and me. I left. I don't remember getting to the truck. Dana was up when I got home. She had a glass of wine and one of those crossword apps, and she took one look at my face and put the phone down. I told her all of it, the fall, the 5 hours, the house line. And my wife, 26 years of hospice. She has walked into more of these houses than you or I will ever see. My wife sat very still. And then she asked me a question that took the floor out from under me. She said, "Ray, did she call you?" I said, "That's the whole point." She said she called and there's no, Dana said, "Not tonight, ever. Has Delia ever called you?" And I sat there, 10 months, nearly a year of that woman in my father's life, Sunday dinners, a wedding I found out about at a hardware store. And I went back through every bit of it in my head, and I could not find one single time, not one, that Delia Vance had ever picked up a phone and called me herself. Every message came through Dad, every invitation, every cancellation. Delia says the roads are bad. Delia thinks we'll do it next week. She had been in my family for 10 months, and she had never once left a fingerprint. Now, let me ask you something. Right now, before I go on. If you were me, if some woman married your father and you found out at the hardware store, and there's no call log, no email, no text, nothing with her name on it anywhere, what exactly do you take to somebody? What do you show them? That's the trap. And she built it before I ever knew I was in it. But I had one card left, so that Monday I played it. I went to see Merle Otis. Merle's office is above the bank on Main, 40 years. Green carpet, a window unit that rattles, a picture of him and my father at some Rotary thing in 1994. He handled Dad's will, he handled the business, he buried my grandmother's estate. I sat down and I said, "Merle, I need to know what's in my father's file." And Merle Otis took his glasses off and cleaned them on his tie and took a long time doing it. He said, "Ray, I can't tell you what's in your father's file." I said, "Merle, son," he put the glasses back on, "I can't tell you what's in it. But I'll tell you this much, because it isn't privileged. I don't have one anymore. 4 months earlier, Dad came in, Delia drove him. Terminated 40 years of representation on a form that took 90 seconds to sign. Merle said Dad wouldn't look at him. Said Delia did the talking, very pleasant, said they were consolidating everything in one place. And then Merle leaned back in that chair and said the thing that got its hooks in me. He said, "Ray, in 40 years, I have had a lot of new wives sit where you're sitting. They all asked the same question. What's he got?" He tapped the desk twice. She never asked me that. Not once. She asked me how Kettle Lake was titled. I said, "What's the difference?" And Merle said, "The difference is one is a question you ask when you're curious. The other is a question you ask when you already know the answer to the first one." Then he asked me where she came from. I said Florida. And Merle Otis didn't say anything at all. He just looked at me over those glasses with an expression I couldn't read and let the window unit rattle. That nothing sat in my chest for 8 months. Hey, quick thing, right here at the breath. If you're still with me and this has got its hooks in you, subscribe, drop a like, tap that bell so the next story finds you. All right, back to it. November. Every November of my adult life, I drive up to Kettle Lake and winterize the cabin, drain the lines, blow out the pipes, shut the well off, put the boards in the windows. Takes a day. Dad used to come, hadn't in a few years, but it was still hours. That's just what a Hollis does in November. I pulled in around 10 in the morning. Gray sky, no leaves left, that lake smell. And there was a lockbox hanging on the door handle, one of those gray realtor lockboxes, combination dial, hanging off my father's door. I stood there in the driveway with a shop vac in my hands like a man who'd walked into the wrong house. Then I walked down to the water. Didn't decide to, just went. And I crouched down on the end of that dock, and I put my hand on the footing where a 14-year-old kid dragged a 16-penny nail through wet concrete in 1989 while his father watched and didn't say a word. RH, still there. You can still read it. And I sat there a while, and then I went back up to my truck, and I flipped the paper tag on that lockbox over and dialed the number on the back. Woman picked up on the second ring, real cheerful. Realty office out of Millbrook. I said, "Hi, I'm calling about a lockbox on a property at Kettle Lake off Bell Hollow Road." And she said, "Oh, the Vance place?" I said, "The what?" And she said, "Bright as a Tuesday morning, the Vance property out on Kettle Lake. Are you calling about the survey?" The survey. My name is Hollis. My father's name is Hollis. There has been a Hollis on that lake since 1971. And some woman in an office 11 miles away was calling it the Vance property and asking me about a survey nobody had ever told me existed. I should have hung up. Instead, and I don't know where it came from, I heard myself smile into that phone and say, "Right, the survey. Remind me where we landed on that? I'm out here now and I've got a man asking." Contractor voice. 30 years of talking to subs and inspectors. It just came out. And Joanne, that was her name, Joanne, out of the Millbrook office. Joanne was happy to help. She told me the surveyor had been out in October, that it was a lot split. A boundary line adjustment, she called it. They were carving the lake frontage and the cabin off the 40 acres and making it its own parcel, separate deed, separate everything. I said, "Huh," and that's all signed off. And she said, "Oh, Mrs. Vance took care of all that. She said the family was on board." The family. I said, "Thank you." I said I'd call back. My voice did all of that. And then I put the phone in my pocket and I walked into the trees along the north side of that property with a shop vac still sitting in the bed of my truck. Took me maybe 6 minutes to find one. A wooden stake. Fresh cut. Pink ribbon on it, still bright, no weather on it yet, and another one about 80 feet down, and another. I stood there and I sighted the line the way you do, and I followed it with my eyes all the way down the slope, and it came out at the water about 15 feet north of my dock. My dock was on the sellable side. Now, understand what a lot split is, in plain English, because it took me a week to understand it, and I do this for a living. You take one thing that's hard to sell, 40 acres of scrub and a leaky cabin, and you cut it into two things. One is worthless. One is lake frontage. You don't do that to keep a place. You do that to move it. 3 days later, I drove to Millbrook. Because here's what I finally figured out sitting at my kitchen table at 4 a.m. She had my father. She had the phone. She had the mail. She'd taken his lawyer, and she'd taken my name off his papers, and every road to Walter Hollis ran through her living room, but she couldn't take the county recorder's office. The recorder's office belongs to everybody. Anybody can walk in. You don't need a reason, you don't need permission, you don't need to be anybody's son. You just walk up to a counter and say a name. There's a woman there named Patrice, gray cardigan. Been there 20-some years. She set me up at a terminal along the wall and showed me how to search by parcel, and she said, "Take your time, hun." I typed in my father's name, and there it was. Filed the previous winter. A quitclaim deed. Walter A. Hollis granting the Kettle Lake property to Walter A. Hollis and Delia J. Vance, joint tenants. With right of survivorship, I read that last part 4 times before it went in, and I need you to understand what those 5 words do, because I sure didn't. Right of survivorship. It means when one owner dies, the other one doesn't inherit it. She already owns it. There's no probate. There's no reading of the will. The will never even sees it. The will is a set of instructions for a man's things, and that property stops being one of his things the second his heart stops. It doesn't pass. It just finishes belonging to him. You could write a will 100 pages long, leaving that lake to your son, and it would be a piece of paper about a place you don't own. And that's when Merle Otis's question came back and hit me in the chest so hard I had to put my hand flat on that table. She asked me how Kettle Lake was titled. Not what's it worth, not what's he got, how is it titled? Because a woman who knows the difference between a will and a title is a woman who knows the will doesn't matter. Then I looked at the date. The deed was signed on a Friday in February, notarized at 11:15 in the morning. And I sat there and I felt the floor start to go, because I knew that Friday. Sandy Kepler had told me about that Friday over a box of deck screws. So I asked Patrice where they keep the marriage licenses. Same building, 1 floor down, Walter A. Hollis and Delia J. Vance. Issued at 10:40 a.m. 35 minutes. They got married at 20 to 11, and by 1:15, half of my mother's lake had a new owner. Same courthouse, same morning, probably the same pen. And I stood in that hallway with a photocopy in my hand and finally understood what I'd been looking at for a year. The wedding wasn't the event. The wedding was the appointment before the event. The wedding was the thing you have to do first, the way you get a permit before you pour. That whole thing, The pie, the laughing, the grief group, the 10 patient months of being good to a lonely old man. All of it was paperwork she had to file to get to 11:15. Now let me ask you something, right now. Because I've asked myself this maybe 1,000 times since. If a woman marries your father at 10:40 in the morning and takes half his land at 11:15, at what point did she decide to do that? Was it that morning? Was it the week before? Or was it the first Sunday, standing in my mother's kitchen, holding a warm pie, asking me how the Feltner job turned out, and remembering the answer? Because that's the question that stopped me sleeping. That, and the name. Delia J. Vance. She married my father in February. And on that deed, in that county, under that seal, she was still Delia Vance. She never filed a thing, never changed a document, never took his name. But she was Delia Hollis at the Bethel potluck. She was Delia Hollis on the Christmas card that went out to 80 people. She was Mrs. Hollis to Sandy Kepler, and to Pat with the tissue box, and to every soul in Hadley Falls, Ohio. Delia Hollis in every room she ever walked into. Delia Vance on every single piece of paper with a seal on it. I told Dana that at 11 o'clock at night, standing in our kitchen with my coat still on. And my wife looked at me for a long moment and she said, "Quiet, Ray. That's a name you can walk away from." And then she got her laptop. She's the one who found him. I want that said because I've taken enough credit in this story. It was Dana. She said, "You keep going at Delia. Delia's clean." Go at Owen. Owen Vance, Florida, a long illness. Took her 4 minutes. The obituary was 6 lines long. 6 lines. 71 years old, a man who'd lived a whole entire life, and it was 6 lines in a Sarasota paper. It didn't say what he did for work, didn't say where he was born. And it ended like this. He is survived by his devoted wife, Delia. That was it. That was everybody. No children, no brothers, no sisters, not one other human being on this earth. And Dana, sitting there in her scrubs, 26 years of walking into strangers' bedrooms at the worst hour of their lives, Dana went very still. She said, "Ray, I've stood in the room while a family writes one of those." She said, "Somebody sits down and decides who goes in it." And then she said the thing I'm never going to forget. "Nobody has nobody, so we went hunting. And it wasn't Owen we found. Owen's paper trail was as clean as hers. It was his mother, Ruth Vance. Died in 2009, 16 years before any of this. And her obituary was long, the kind of family writes when they're all still talking to each other. Church, garden club, 41 years at the same school. And in the last paragraph, the way they always do it, she is survived by her son Owen and her adored grandson Curtis. I put my hand over my mouth. I actually did that. There was a son. Owen Vance had a son. A living, breathing, adored grandson named Curtis Vance. And when Owen died, that man's name did not appear anywhere in his own father's death notice. She hadn't just taken a man's money. She'd taken his boy out of his obituary. There was a son. And I couldn't find him. I want you to appreciate the joke God was playing on me. I'd finally found a living human being on this earth who could tell me what I was dealing with. And it turned out Curtis Vance didn't exist either. I typed that name into everything I could think of over the next 2 weeks. And I got 41 of them. A Curtis Vance who fixed transmissions in Tucson. A Curtis Vance who was 19 years old and played video games. None of them mine. No photograph, no town, no age. Just a name in the last paragraph of an old woman's obituary from 2009. And meanwhile, my father was 3 miles away, so I did the dumbest thing a man in my position can do. I printed that deed, and I drove to Vinton Street. Delia wasn't there. Wednesday morning, she had her book club, she always had something, and I remember thinking good. I remember thinking I'd finally caught a break. She'd been leaving me alone with him for months. It took me a long time to understand that wasn't luck. Dad was at the table, crossword, pen, and I sat down across from him, and I slid that photocopy over the wood, and I made myself say it slow and flat, no heat in it at all. I said, "Dad, this is the lake. You put her name on it. Same day you got married, 35 minutes after." And he picked it up, arm's length, read it. And he set it back down and said, I know. I said, "You know?" And my father looked at me with those pale eyes and said, "I signed it, Raymond. I was there. Nobody tricked me. I signed my own name in my own hand." And that took the legs out from under everything I'd built for a year. Because I'd been carrying around this picture, the confused old man, the pen guided across the page, and here he was, sharper than me, telling me he'd done it on purpose. So I asked him why. That's all. Just why. And he was quiet for a while. And then he said something I've thought about every single day since. He said, because she asked me to. That's it. That's the whole answer. 4 words. I said, Dad, that's not a reason. And he cut me off. And he wasn't angry. That's what got me. He said it almost gently. He said, your mother never asked me for anything. 49 years. Not one thing. And I never gave her anything either. And now she's in the ground and I can't. And then this one asked. So I gave. Look. I've had years to take that sentence apart. And I'm telling you, that's not a man being robbed. That's a man paying a debt to the wrong person at the wrong window. He wasn't buying her a lake. He was buying back 49 years of never once saying the thing out loud. And Delia Vance found the exact size and shape of that hole in about 10 months. I should have stopped there. I didn't. I pushed. I said the word pattern. I said the word lawyer. And my father put his pen down and he said, get out of my house. Not shouting. Just done. And I got up. And on my way out through that kitchen, the kitchen I built, with the drawer full of my mother's grocery lists on the backs of envelopes, I looked at the windowsill over the sink. Her reading glasses were gone. Empty sill. Clean. Not a fingerprint on the paint. I didn't ask. I got in my truck and I drove home and I never asked, not for a long, long time, but you remember those glasses, all right? Because they come back. One other thing from that morning, and I didn't think about it once for the next 4 months. When I sat down, I noticed his belt was buckled 2 holes past where it used to sit. He'd lost weight. And I said something about the fall, about the ER. Did they ever chase that down? And my father waved his hand and said, they looked at it. It's nothing. Delia handles the appointments now. Delia handles the appointments now. 4 words again. I let it go right past me. Dana was the one who kept me from going under that winter. 26 years of hospice. You don't get to lie to a woman like that. And when I finished telling her about get out of my house, she didn't hand me a tissue. She said, Ray, he's not choosing her. He's choosing not to be alone. That is not the same thing. And if you can't hear the difference, you're going to lose him for real. Then she said, stop trying to win. Go find the sun. So I went back to what I actually know. I'm not a detective, but I've pulled permits in 9 counties. I've sat in courthouse basements waiting on a plat map. And I'd already learned the one lesson that mattered, standing at that terminal in Millbrook with Patrice and her gray cardigan telling me to take my time. Public records belong to everybody. Ruth Vance died in 2009, which meant somewhere in Georgia there was a probate file with her name on it. And a probate file, folks, a probate file has to list the heirs, by name, with addresses. It took 4 phone calls and $19, and 11 days later, a manila envelope showed up at my house. And on page 2, in a typed list, under known heirs at law, Curtis A. Vance. With a street address, in Denham, Georgia. 16 years old, that address. I didn't care. I sat down that night and I wrote him a letter by hand. And I want to tell you exactly what I put in it, because this part matters more than anything else I did. I did not mention Delia. I did not mention his father's obituary, or a will, or a deed, or a dollar. I wrote, my name is Ray Hollis. I'm trying to reach the son of Owen Vance of Sarasota, Florida. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not selling anything. I don't want a thing from you. I have one question about your family, and if you answer it, I will never contact you again. My number's below. That was the whole letter. 8 lines. It came back 3 weeks later. Return to sender. So I found every Curtis Vance in the right age range I could scrape together. Property records, a $30 search site, a public voter roll, and I sat at my kitchen table on a Sunday night in January, and I wrote that same letter out 11 times. Longhand. 11 envelopes. 11 stamps. Dana watched me lick the last one and said, you know this is insane. I said, she takes paper out of the world. I'm putting some back in. Quick thing, right here, while the mail's going out. If this story's got a hold of you, do me the favor. Subscribe, hit that like button, tap the bell so the next one comes and finds you. Now, back to it. Nothing came back. Not in January, not in February. You want to know what that's like? It's like being the only person at a funeral for somebody who isn't dead yet. My dad was alive, 3 miles away, doing the crossword in pen. And I'd sit at my table at 4 a.m. going through a stack of photocopies like a crazy man, and Dana would come down and stand behind me and put a hand on my neck and not say anything at all. And then Nora called. My daughter. First week of February. She's expecting. First one. Due in September. My father was going to be a great-grandfather, and I couldn't get through his front door to tell him. That's where I was on the 9th of March. Truck. Parking lot behind the lumberyard. Turkey sandwich. and my phone rang with a number I didn't know, area code I didn't know. And a man's voice, very low, said, "Are you the one who sent this?" I sat straight up. I said, "Yes, sir, thank you. Listen, a woman married my..." And he cut me off so fast it startled me. He said, "Don't, not on a phone. And then, don't email me. Don't put another word on paper. If you want to talk to me, you come here." He gave me an address, made me read it back. And I said the only thing I could think of. I said, "Can you just tell me if I'm right? Please. Am I right?" And there was this long, long silence on that line. And then Curtis Vance said, "Mr. Hollis?" "Whatever you think she is. You're about 4 names short." I sat in that lumberyard lot with a turkey sandwich going soft in my lap, and I did not move for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 because I watched the clock on the dash do it. Then I drove home and I told Dana. She didn't argue. She didn't ask what I thought I was going to say, or whether this was the thing that finally tipped me all the way over. She went upstairs and she came back down with my duffel already packed, and she set it by the door and said, "Take the good boots. It's going to rain. 11 hours to a town called Ardsley, Georgia, 40 minutes south of Macon, brick ranch house, carport, basketball hoop with no net on it. So now you know how I ended up on that porch." I said, "Hollis." He stopped halfway down that hallway, didn't turn around. He said, "Legally?" And I said, "No." And he nodded, one time, down and up, the way a man does when he's checking a box he already filled in himself. He said, "Yeah, she doesn't." Curtis Vance was 47 years old, younger than me. Gray coming in at the temples, work shirt with his first name stitched on it. He drove a route for a bakery distributor, 3 states, out at 4 every morning. Just a guy. That's the thing I want you to hold on to. Not a detective, not a crusader. A regular man in a small rented house who happened to have one room in it that would stop your heart. Before I take you into that kitchen, do me one favor, subscribe, hit like, tap that bell so the next one finds you. All right, come on in. He put coffee in front of me. Then he sat down and he said, "Before I start, I need you to understand something about me because you're going to lose respect for me and I'd rather it happen now." He said, "I sued her 6 years ago and I lost. And when I ran out of money, her lawyer offered me $40,000 and a piece of paper, and I signed it." He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn on the table. Mutual non-disparagement. Full release. I can't say her name in public. I can't write it down. I can't testify. If I do, she takes the 40 back plus fees, and I don't have it. I paid a lawyer with it. He looked up. "So that's who I am. I'm the man who took her money. That's why I wouldn't talk to you on a phone. That's why your letters got to burn. Whatever you leave here with, Mr.ish." "Hollis, you leave here with in your head." I said I understood, and then he said, "You wrote me 11 times. I said, 12. And Curtis Vance smiled, and it was the saddest thing I've seen on a grown man's face. He said, "I've been waiting 6 years for somebody to knock on this door. I just never knew which one of you it'd be." Then he went and got the box. Cardboard. Banker's box. And he didn't hand it to me. He took things out one at a time and turned them around on the table so I could read them, and never once let go. He said, "Delia June Pruitt, born 1962. Kiowa Bend, Kansas. That's her. That's the only true name she's got." Then his hand went into the box. "Delia Kilgore. Emmett Kilgore, farm implement dealership outside Joplin, Missouri. Married her in 92, dead in 94. Next, Delia Ashworth, Gordon Ashworth, Chattanooga, owned 4 car washes. Married 99, dead in 2001. Next, Delia Renner, Paul Renner, Owensboro, Kentucky, 2006, dead in 2008. And then he laid down a 6-line obituary out of a Sarasota paper that I had already read on my wife's laptop at 11 o'clock at night, 400 miles north of there. Delia Vance, my dad. Owen. He sold industrial flooring, and he did the jumble every morning, and my mother was married to him 44 years before the cancer took her. Delia married him in January of 2020. He was dead in August of 21. 5 names. And in the middle of every single one of them, every marriage license, every deed, every death certificate, the same letter. J. June. Delia. June Pruitt. That middle initial is the only thing about that woman that ever told the truth. I said, "How did you get all this?" And Curtis said, "I stood at a counter in a courthouse in Florida, and a lady in a cardigan showed me how to search by name. I had to look away from him for a second. 2 men. 1,100 miles apart. 6 years apart. Same counter. Same cardigan. Same lesson. The one thing she cannot touch is the fact that anybody at all can walk in and ask." Then he said, "Now ask me what they died of." I said, "What did they die of?" And Curtis Vance said, "Nothing." He said Kilgore cut his hand on a bearing puller. Infection, 12 days. Ashworth had walking pneumonia that quit walking. Renner went down on the back steps and hit his head, and nobody took him in for 2 days, and the bleed finished it. And then, flat as a table, my father had blood in his stool for a year and a half. When they finally opened him up, it was in his liver. He sat back. Every one of them. Every single one. Ordinary. Boring. The kind of thing a doctor catches on a Tuesday and you're annoyed about the copay. And that's when it came apart in my head. All of it. 3 years of it at once. Because I'd had it backwards from the first day. I thought she took my name off my father's medical papers because she wanted the money and I was in the way of the money. No, she took my name off his medical papers because I'm the one who says that doesn't sound right, Dad. Let's get it looked at. That's what a son is. That's the whole job. That's the entire function of a grown man with a truck and a Sunday free. He's the one who notices the belt buckled, 2 holes past where it used to sit. 11 days in, she reached across that whole family and pulled out the one part that would have made a phone call. Everything after that, the lawyer, the lake, the deed at 11:15 in the morning, that was just shopping. The first thing she ever took wasn't $1. It was me. She doesn't kill anybody, you understand? She never lifts a hand. She just stands there, very kind, very patient, and doesn't make the appointment. And there's no law against that. There's no law anywhere on this earth against a wife who forgot. And then Curtis said, "So, how long has your father got?" Same words he'd said through the screen door. And now I knew he'd been asking me arithmetic. I said, "They married in February, 2 years ago last month." He counted it on his fingers, right there. Didn't even hide it. Then he stopped. He said, Kilgore was 23 months. Ashworth was 21. Renner 18. My dad was 19. He looked up. "Mr. Hollis, your father's at 25. I said, "So he's past it." And Curtis said, "Nobody's ever been past it." And then he said the thing I'm going to carry to my grave. He said, "Do you want to know why?" He leaned in on his elbows. "Because your dad's got something none of the other 5 had. He's got a son who's still in the room." 25 months of me. 25 months of showing up angry and stupid and loud, arguing in a kitchen, printing deeds, getting told to get out. 25 months of the big dumb contractor who would not leave. She needed me furious because she needed me gone. And I never went. I sat in that man's kitchen with my hands around a cold cup of coffee, and I cried for the first time since the funeral. And Curtis Vance didn't say a word, just let me. That's what 6 years buys you, I guess. You learn when to shut up. Then he said, "Now the part you're not going to like." He said, "Stop fighting her over the lake. You will lose." I lost. I had the deeds. I had the dates. I had a lawyer with a nice office, and I stood in front of a judge, and I looked exactly like what she needed me to look like, a greedy son. He tapped the table twice. "Let her have the money. All of it. Every dollar. Take the man. Get him in front of a doctor." That's the only game she has never won, because it's the only one she can't play from a kitchen. Then he asked me one more question. Just conversation, almost an afterthought. He said, "When did you tell her you knew?" And I said, "November." Put a copy of the deed on the table in front of him, and the color went out of Curtis Vance's face. He said, very quietly, "My father was scheduled for 24 months. I know that because she didn't file the lot split on his place until month 16. She was in no hurry. She was still working." He swallowed. "I called a lawyer in month 14. She found out about it in 15. He was dead at 19. He said, Mr. Hollis. She doesn't wait once she's seen. And I didn't say goodbye to that man. I want you to know that. 6 years he waited for somebody to knock, and I stood up so fast the chair went over backwards, and I went out through that screen door into the rain, and I never even thanked him. I sat in my truck for 40 minutes writing it all down, every name, every date, every month, on the back of a gas receipt, because that's what you use when it matters, and there's nothing else in the cab. My mother knew that. There's a drawer in that kitchen full of it. Then I put my hands on the wheel, and I got out my phone, and I called my father's cell at 9:40 at night from a driveway in Ardsley, Georgia. It rang 4 times. And then a woman picked it up. Ray. Not hello. Not the Hollis residence. Just my name. Like she'd been sitting there waiting on it. And I need you to understand what that was. In 25 months of that woman being in my family, I had never once heard her voice come out of a telephone. Not a single time. My wife asked me that question in our own kitchen a long time back, and the answer had been no every day since. And now here she was, 9:40 at night, holding my father's phone in my mother's house. I said, "Hey, Delia." He up, and she said, soft, warm, a little bit sorry for me. "Oh, honey." He's been down since 8. He just doesn't have it in him anymore. Rain was coming off that carport so hard I couldn't see the house I just walked out of. And then she started telling me things. That he wasn't eating, half a piece of toast in the morning, and he'd push the rest away. That he got dizzy standing up too fast, so she'd been having him sit a minute first, just to be safe. That he'd gotten so thin, she'd taken his belt in twice. Punched the new holes myself with a nail. Isn't that something? 2 years of silence out of that woman. And now, out of nowhere, a full report. She was telling me, freely, tearfully, every symptom in order. Because she'd run the same numbers Curtis Vance ran on his fingers across a kitchen table 40 minutes earlier. She knew exactly what month it was. And there is nothing on God's earth safer than a woman who worries out loud, so I asked it, flat, nothing in my voice at all. I said, has he seen anybody about any of that? And Delia said, we're managing. And then, kinda Sunday, I'll tell him you called. There it is. That's the whole thing. That's the murder weapon, and you can say it out loud in a church basement with a cup of bad coffee in your hand, and nobody will even look up. Now, everything in me wanted to come through that phone line and take that house apart. 2 years of it, right there in my throat. But I just spent an afternoon with a man in a work shirt telling me exactly what happens to people who let her see. So I gave her the only thing she'd ever believe. I let my voice go small. Tired. Beaten. I said, yeah, well, he don't much want to hear from me anyway. Does he? And Delia Vance made a little sound like her heart was breaking. She said, oh, Ray, don't say that, honey. Just give him time. I said, okay. And I hung up. For 25 months, that woman had been telling my father exactly what I was about to do, and then I'd go and do it. Every single time. Right on cue, like a man reading his lines off her page. That was the first time in my life I ever did it on purpose. Hey, before I put that truck in gear, if you're still riding along with me this far in, do me the favor, subscribe, leave a like, tap that bell. It genuinely helps. All right, let's go home. I drove. I stopped for gas outside Chattanooga at 10 after 2 in the morning, and I stood there under those white lights with the pump running. And I thought about a man named Gordon Ashworth who owned 4 car washes in that town and had 21 months. Then I got back in and I called my wife. She picked up on the first ring, 2 in the morning. She'd been sitting up. I told her all of it. The names, the 5, the middle initial. The $40,000 and the piece of paper that made Curtis Vance a man who can't say her name. And Dana didn't gasp. 26 years of hospice. You don't get gasps out of a woman like that. She just went quiet for a second, and then she got very, very precise. She said, Ray, you've been trying to get a judge to hand you your father. That is never going to happen. He's not incompetent. She never made him incompetent. She made him unattended. And there's no court in Ohio that's got a form for that. I said, then what do I do? And she said, nothing. I said, Dana, no, listen to me. That's the point, honey. You don't have to do anything. He can consent to his own care. He's a grown man with a driver's license and all his marbles. He can walk into any emergency room in this state on his own 2 feet and stick his own arm out, and she cannot lift a finger to stop him. She let that sit. Then she said, Ray, she's never once had to stop him. All she's ever had to do is make sure nobody asked. And I said, so I ask. And my wife said, so ask. I want to tell you something about the Hollis family. Nobody in it has ever asked anybody for a single thing. Not once. Not in 3 generations. My grandfather didn't. My father didn't. And I sure as hell didn't 30 years. And I never asked that man for help on a job, a dollar, a ride, or an opinion. We just showed up. That was our whole religion. Showing up instead of asking. And a woman from Kiowa Bend, Kansas took one look at us and found the hole it made. Because she asked. And he'd never in his life had anybody ask. Then Dana said one more thing, and it's the reason for everything that came after. She said, and don't you dare walk in there with paper. No deeds, no box. Nothing with a seal on it, I said. Then with what? And she said, he told you your mother never asked him for anything. Yeah, Ray. That's not true. And I didn't say anything. That's the only lie in this whole business that isn't hers, Dana said. That one's his. He's been carrying it around for 3.5 years, and it's the thing she's standing on. Go get it back for him. I hung up somewhere north of Knoxville, and I drove. And it came to me around dawn, on 75 north of Cincinnati, with the sun coming up gray over the ramps, and I said it out loud in an empty truck like a crazy man. Milk. Sharp cheddar. Light bulbs. I pulled into my own driveway at 8:40 in the morning on a Wednesday. Dana was on the porch in her scrubs. She didn't ask me one question. She just handed me a travel mug and said, it's Wednesday. Book club. I never even shut the truck off. 11 hours of road on me, rainwater still in my boots, 3 days of beard, and I let myself into my father's house at 9 in the morning like a man walking to the end of a diving board. He was at the table. Crossword. Pen. He looked up and he saw the state of me. And he didn't say one word about it. That's Walter Hollis. Man could watch you crawl in on your hands and knees and he'd just move the coffee over. And I didn't sit down. I walked past him, straight to the counter, and I pulled the drawer I built. Second one over from the stove, 31 years ago, half-inch birch ply and a piano hinge on the front, because my mother didn't like the way the store ones rattled. It was empty, not tidied, not thinned out, empty. Fresh shelf paper, that blue and white gingham kind, cut clean at the corners. Not a rubber band, not a crumb, not one torn open envelope with sharp cheddar on the back of it in a dead woman's handwriting. And I stood there with my hand on that drawer front, and I felt the whole floor of my life tilt about 4 degrees. I said, Dad, where's Mom's lists? And my father said, and kept doing the crossword, so I went out to the garage, his garage, where he went down on one knee back in September and nobody called me. And it took me maybe 90 seconds, because I'm 6'1" and I've spent 30 years finding things on top shelves. There was a banker's box up over the workbench. Top shelf. The one you need the step stool for. The step stool that was sitting folded up behind the water heater on the other side of the room. One word on the end of it, in pencil. Small, neat, ladylike hand. OLD. 3 letters. 49 years of a woman. In a cardboard box marked OLD, on a shelf, a 78-year-old man who gets dizzy could never in 100 years have reached. She didn't throw them away. You understand? Throwing them away is a thing a person could get mad about. She just put them somewhere he couldn't go. I got it down, and I sat on that concrete floor in my coat, and I opened it. Photographs. A church cookbook with a cracked spine, her hairbrush. A brick of torn envelopes about 4 inches thick, held together with 2 rubber bands gone hard and orange with age. And on top, folded, exactly the way she folded them every night of her life, her reading glasses. I carried that box into the kitchen, and I set it on the floor. And I took those glasses, and I put them down on the wood, right in front of my father's crossword, same spot I'd put the deed. Same table I got thrown out of. And Walter Hollis stopped moving. He looked at them for a long, long time, didn't touch them, and then he said, real quiet, like he was scared of the answer, Ray. Where'd you find those? I said, the garage. Top shelf. And my father said, I've been looking for those for a year, not since the funeral, a year. And standing there with my coat still on and rainwater still in my boots, I finally understood the whole thing. She didn't take them because she wanted them. What's an old woman's reading glasses to a woman like that? She took them because of what my father said to me at that table. Your mother never asked me for anything, and I never gave her anything either. She needed that to stay true. She wasn't stealing keepsakes. She was doing upkeep. On a whole. Every week, quietly, the way you'd water a plant. So I put that box on the table and I cut the rubber bands with my pocket knife. They didn't stretch. They snapped like dry twigs. Envelopes, 4 inches of them. Electric bills, phone bills, Christmas cards with the address torn off. And my father reached for one and stopped, because he can't read a thing without glasses, and the only pair on that table was hers. He put them on. 78 years old, wearing his dead wife's readers, tipping his head back because the prescription was all wrong and the whole world had gone to soup. He didn't take them off, so I picked one up and I read it out loud. Milk, sharp cheddar, light bulbs. And I said, Dad, 49 years. 52 weeks a year. That's 2,548. I said, she asked you 2,548 times. And you went, every single time, on the bad knee, in the ice, the week we buried Grandma. The night I broke my arm, you drove me to the ER and then you stopped at the store on the way home because she'd asked. I said, you told me she never asked you for anything. Dad, she never asked you for anything else. That's what this drawer is. That's 49 years of a woman asking a man for something and a man saying yes before she ever had to say please. And then I said the thing I drove 11 hours to say. You didn't owe anybody. You'd already paid. You paid every week of your life, and milk. My father didn't cry. Walter Hollis doesn't do that. He just took her glasses off, and he folded them, and I want you to understand, he folded them exactly the way she did. Left arm, then right, then the little turn. His hands knew it. 49 years of watching a woman do a thing at a kitchen sink, and his hands just knew it. He set them down, and he said, 1 syllable. That's a Walter Hollis coming apart. That's the whole earthquake. So I sat down. I hadn't sat down in that kitchen in 14 months. I'd been standing over that man like a process server, waving paper at him. I said, "Dad, I've never asked you for anything. 51 years. Not a dollar, not a ride, not a hand on a job, and according to you, Mom never did either, and I just proved that's a lie." So the Hollis family is, for 3 generations. He didn't say anything. I said, "I'm asking you for one thing, today." And my father looked up at me through the tops of his eyes and said, "Ask." And I said, "Come to the doctor with me." Nothing. 10 seconds. 20. The clock over the stove. And then Walter Hollis put his pen down and said, "Get my coat." And I never said her name. Not once. Not one time in that entire kitchen. That's why it worked. Every other thing I ever carried through that door, the deed, the letter, the word pattern, she'd handed him the script a month before I got there. She knew my lines because she'd written them. She never wrote this one. Because she'd already thrown it in a box marked OLD, Millbrook General. Emergency entrance. Same sliding doors he sat behind for 5 hours in September while nobody called me. And I did not walk up to that desk. I want that on the record. I stood back by the chairs with my hands in my pockets, because my name is not on one piece of paper in that building. She took it off 11 days into a marriage. Legally, I'm nobody. I'm just a big man in a Carhartt. So my father walked up to that counter by himself, belt buckled 2 holes past, put both hands flat on it, and he said, "My name's Walter Hollis. I'd like somebody to look at me." That's it. 9 words. That is the entire thing she spent 25 months of pie and patience and paperwork preventing, and it took 9 words and one old man standing on his own 2 feet. Blood work in 20 minutes. Hemoglobin of 7.9. A man that low is running on fumes. That's your dizziness. That's your garage floor. That's the belt. He'd been bleeding, slow, for a long, long time. They kept him. Scoped him Friday. Sigmoid colon, low down, a tumor the size of a plum, growing in the dark for years. Stage 3, through the wall into 3 nodes, not the liver. Curtis Vance's father. They opened him up and it was in his liver, and there was nothing left to do but make him comfortable. The surgeon stood in that hallway and told me another 8 to 12 weeks, and we'd have been having a very different conversation. 8 to 12 weeks. He was at 25 months, Kilgore 23, Ashworth 21, Renner 18, Owen Vance 19. She wasn't behind schedule, she was right on time, she was just waiting on a body to do the work for her, the way it always had. And then, because a patient can ask for his own chart, and there is not one thing a wife or a son can do about it, my father requested his own records. September. Hemoglobin 9.4. Flagged. Recommend outpatient GI evaluation. Follow up within 7 days. A referral placed by an ER doc who did his job right and went home to his family. Appointment, October the 2nd. No show. And then a note, because those offices write everything down. Called to reschedule. Spoke with patient's wife. PT reports feeling much better. Declined. December. Spoke with spouse. Declined. February, spouse advises PT under care elsewhere. 3 times. 3 separate human beings picked up a telephone and did their job, and 3 times a kind woman with a warm voice told them not to worry. That's the murder. That's the whole murder. 4 lines in a chart, and there isn't a prosecutor in this country who'd touch it, because a wife saying her husband feels better isn't a crime. It's a Tuesday. But it's ink. 25 months without a fingerprint on my family, and the only place that woman ever let her voice be written down was the place where she was saying no for him. She was gone before he came home from surgery. No screaming, no fight. She didn't take the silver. She did the smartest thing she's ever done, and she's had 5 tries at it. She got out in front of it. She stood up in the fellowship hall at Bethel Methodist. The same folding chairs, the same bad coffee, the room my wife drove my father to. And she told those people, with real tears on her face, that she'd sat by her Owen while cancer took him, and she could not do it twice. That she'd tried. That she'd loved that man. That she had to go before it broke her. Pat held her in the parking lot, and Sandy Kepler said that poor woman to me over a box of deck screws. And I said, yeah, she sure is. Because Curtis warned me at that table in Georgia, you will look exactly like what she needs you to look like. So I let this whole town believe I'm the son who ran off his father's wife while the man was on the table. I'll be that guy, rest of my life. That's the price. I paid it, and I'd pay it again tomorrow. She took the money, all of it. Every dollar in that account, and I never made one phone call about it. It was never the thing. But she couldn't take the lake, and I hope you enjoy this next part half as much as I do. Joint tenants with right of survivorship. She's owned half of Kettle Lake since 11:15 in the morning on a Friday in February, and she cannot sell 1 square inch of it without my father's name beside hers. And if she wants to force it, there's a way. It's called a partition action. You file it in the county where the land sits. Hadley County, Ohio. You put your name on it, your real one, under oath, in a room, with a clerk and a judge and a court reporter typing every word. And it goes in a file. And that file sits at a counter where anybody at all can walk up and ask for it. She built an entire life out of never being in that room. She's got $300,000 of lake frontage she cannot sell, cannot spend, cannot leave to a living soul. And the only clean way it ever comes to her is if she outlives him. My father's last 2 scans were clear. He mows his own grass. Delia June Pruitt is 66 years old and she smoked for 40 years. She called me one time, that April, area code I didn't know, warm, God, she was so warm. She said, Ray, honey, it's just sitting up there. Nobody's using it. It's not doing anybody any good. And she asked me to sign. 25 months in my family and she never once picked up a phone. And now here she was, asking. Because that's the only tool in the bag, isn't it? She finds a man nobody ever asked, and she asks. And I got to say the word. I said, no. And she started right back in, reasonable, patient, so sorry for me. And I said, Delia. There's a set of initials in the concrete down there. 14-year-old kid, 16 penny nail, 1989. You want the other half of my doc? Come to Hadley County and stand up in a room and ask a judge for it out loud. Say your name for the record. And then I said, all 5 of them. And the line went quiet, not hung up, quiet. She stayed on there maybe 4 seconds, breathing. And I've thought about those 4 seconds every day since, because in 25 months, it is the only time I ever heard that woman be surprised. Then she hung up. And that was the last word anybody in my family ever heard out of her. So I wrote it all down. Every name, every county, every date off that gas receipt, plus 4 lines out of my father's chart. And I signed it, Ray Hollis. My name, my hand, my say. Because Curtis can't speak. $40,000 bought that. But there is not one line in that release that says a man can't be handed something. I mailed it to Ardsley, Georgia, with a note on top, Curtis. You don't have to say a word. Just turn it around on the table. He called me 2 weeks later, 4 in the morning, out on his route. He didn't say hello. He said, how's your father? And I said, he's mowing. And there was this long, long silence on that line. And then a 47-year-old man in a bakery truck outside Macon started crying so hard he had to pull over. 6 years he sat in that house waiting on a knock. And in 6 years, I'm the only one who ever came. There's a box in my garage now, 2nd shelf. The one I can reach without the step stool. And if there's a 6th, and there's always a 6th, then one day a man's going to knock on my door with rain in his boots. And I'm not going to make him explain himself. I'm going to open that screen and say, how long has your father got? And then I'm going to hand him the box. Nora had the baby on the 8th of September. Boy, 8 pounds, 1 ounce. They named him Walter. My father heard that and said, well, that's a hell of a thing to do to a kid. And then he had to go stand out on the porch for a while. 2 weeks before that, I came over on a Sunday. Dad was at the table, crossword, pen, and he slid something across the wood at me. An envelope, torn open, electric bill. And on the back, in that block letter machinist's hand, milk-sharp cheddar light bulbs, whatever a baby needs. He didn't look up. He just said, if you're going anyway. 78 years old, 3 generations of Hollis men who never asked a soul for anything. And my father asked me to go get milk. I sat in the Kroger parking lot for 20 minutes before I could make myself walk in. 51-year-old man, big ugly hands, crying over a shopping list. I still have it. It's clipped to the visor in my truck. Her glasses are back on the windowsill over the sink, folded, right where she left them, and every Sunday I check. Still don't mean to. 25 months, that woman had my family. She had the paper, the phone, the lawyer, the lake, and the whole town's sympathy on her way out the door. She never spent one night in a cell, and she never will. But my father is alive. He's alive, and he mows his own grass, and on Sundays he sits in his own chair with a ball game on low and a great-grandson asleep on his chest, and neither one of us says much. That's what I got. That's the whole score. And she can't have it. Not 1 minute of it. She's had 5 men's money, and she has never once had a Sunday. If this story stayed with you, and you'd like more true-to-life stories of secrets, betrayal, and hard-earned justice, tap the video on your screen now. I'll be waiting for you there.